Is being an Uber driver or a Lyft driver a good idea if you're retired? This is a growing trend, and one person talks about how this is a potential even retirement hack, as they call it, but this can get very, very tricky. Let's check this out. As you can see right here, Lyft driving has been a retirement hack, supplementing his income while allowing to draw on his Social Security without penalty. This is a very complicated thing, immediately, as you can tell from the title. I want to stress, I'm a former accountant, but I'm not your accountant. The taxes and stuff going into something like this, especially with working in Social Security, get very technical. My best advice right away, if you're looking at this, being like, oh, that's kind of interesting, maybe I should try that, always hire a tax accountant. Let me repeat, always hire a tax accountant. Everybody's situation is a bit different. This works for him, but it might not work for you. And I will say, as we get into the article, that, like I said in the beginning of this video, the intro, that people driving for Uber and Lyft while being retired has been growing a lot. I think for a few different reasons. One, the economy. Kind of things to say. A lot of people saying, shoot, I thought I had enough money saved up. Now I don't. I have to go out and get a job. I'm going to drive for Lyft and Uber. The second reason, which I found is actually the most common, is to get out of the house. A lot of people that I've had who are elderly drivers say, hey, you know what? I'm retired. What better way to get out of the house, meet new people, have some social interactions than driving, And I know a lot of people say they love driving for Lyft and Uber. I think because as well, they don't have to worry about the money. They're like, hey, if I make some extra money, cool, I'll give it to my grandson or my nephew or whatever. But I don't have to worry about relying on this money 100%. And then the third reason I find a lot of people drive for Lyft and Uber who are retired is more for the cause of it. That I've had people say, hey, you know what? I had, which is super unfortunate, I can't even imagine, a son or daughter die from a drunk driver, or someone I know die from a drunk driver. I've heard these stories a lot, and they're like, hey, by me going out and driving for Lyft and Uber, I feel like I'm doing a good cause in a sense, right? Which is true, right? I mean, DUIs and drunk driving accidents and all that kind of stuff has decreased significantly as a result of Lyft and Uber and ride sharing in general, right? So going down here, you can see that basically, to sum it up, he began driving for Lyft when he was retired from his 9-to-5 job in 2021. Business tax deductions have allowed him to draw on his Social Security while supplementing his income. But here's a big thing, and this is, I think, a big kicker. I don't know why this is also like that. It's kind of weird. Retirees should understand the tax implications when they enter the gig economy. I will say, and remember, this is a big thing I want to say as a side note as we progress through the article. Remember, and I'm surprised not more people know this, you don't have to be doing your taxes to consult with a tax accountant, right? So you could call it tax accountant and say, hey, you know what? I just want to get some advice. You may have to pay him money, you may not. Depends on the person, probably. Say, hey, you know what? I'm, in this situation, I'm retired. I'm considering driving for Lyft and Uber. Is that okay? In the sense that, is it going to affect my taxes? How does it work? Et cetera, right? So as you see right here, if you only cared about making money, ride hailing wouldn't be a top choice. And this is true. It's almost impossible to make a living due to car depreciation, gas, tolls, tires, and on and on. So I think people know that, like, especially, I've mentioned a bunch of other videos, it's very difficult, right? His interesting hack, though, as he says, it's not the income, but the expenses related to ride hailing. This makes it a retirement hack, right? So like I said before, many Americans have turned to Uber and Lyft during their retirements, earning supplemental income, getting some social interaction, and avoiding boredom. Like I just mentioned, right? Are among their primary motivations, drivers have told Business Insider, but each has their own personal reasons, right? Now, I've done some videos about this, and this gets very, very tricky, right? But here's a big thing, that drivers can deduct business expenses to reduce their taxable incomes. So I'm going to scroll through this. I don't want to talk too much about Social Security on this video, although that's a big relevant point on this article, but let's talk about that, I guess, for a second. If Americans draw on Social Security before their full retirement age, then there's a limit to how high their taxable income can be before their Social Security benefits take a hit, right? And this can vary year to year. There's a lot of factors to this, right? So I almost don't want to talk about this too much and get into the weeds because everybody's situation is different. This is not a one-size-fits-all situation, although in some cases it is, right? Very, very tricky. But going down here, you can see, right, so in 2022, or a couple years ago, he made roughly about $29K driving for Lyft, which is the amount he earned after the company took its cut. However, drivers can deduct business expenses to reduce their taxable incomes. So there's a lot. So remember, the best advice I have, remember, I'm a former accountant, but I'm not your accountant, is what you're buying the ordinary and necessary course of the business. Those are the biggest things. To word that even more simply, are you buying this for Lyft and Uber? Basically, right? So the most common way to do this is mile deductions, which, at least at the exact time of this video, is 67 cents per mile driven for, oh, excuse me. I just like chugged a bunch of coffee before this video, and I think I got some like coffee grounds in my throat. All right, back to the article. You can see it allows drivers to reduce their earnings by 67 cents per mile driven for business use. That's actually one of the biggest like tax write-offs, especially for me for YouTube. In case you didn't know, obviously I do a lot of write-offs for YouTube. That's one of my biggest ones. Although last year I didn't drive that much, which I kind of wish I did more. Because what's funny is when I do road trips and I travel and do like traveling vlogs, I usually write off a good amount, you know. But anyway, let's go back to here. He's talking about some of his deductions. Here's what's interesting. In reality, his taxable income was likely even lower. He could also make business deductions for tolls, car washes, water, and snacks provided to passengers, and other business expenses. So this is a big thing I might as well mention, you know, especially with the tax season being upon us in a couple months, or pretty much right now, in a sense, especially for all the drivers out there. Anything that you buy that relates to you driving for Lyft and Uber is a tax write-off. So let's say if you're like, hey, I'm going to go out and buy a phone mount, which it still blows my mind when I take a Lyft or Uber and I get in the car and they don't have their phone mount and they're like doing this like head bob motion, you know, looking at their phone. I'm like, just get a phone mount. You can get one. I've seen some at the dollar store, right? That's a tax write-off because it relates to you driving for Lyft and Uber. As it says here, car washes, tolls get kind of tricky because sometimes Lyft and Uber reimburse you, right? But car washes, water, snacks, if you buy them for the main purpose of having them in your car, if you buy an aux cord, which I suggest you do. Yes, I know Bluetooth is kind of the newer technology now, but a lot of cars disable you from using Bluetooth when driving, so I think it's just easier to pass the aux cord. I think it's a lot safer too. If you buy a dash cam, that's a tax write-off, right? So a lot of things, anything that you buy specifically in relation to drive for Lyft and Uber can help. I know some drivers, and I've actually mentioned this too, will buy, my brother actually got me one, it was a great present. One of those like, it's not a massager, but it's like a cushion, like a back cushion that you put on your seat. Like, game changing, right? So let's say if you're driving a lot and you want your back position to be healthy, you put it on your seat, you attach it, and you can kind of sit and drive like that. I think that's a tax write-off, right? It relates to you driving Lyft and Uber so that you're less sore so you can drive more, right? And you can see right here that ride-hailing, I don't know why I call it ride-hailing. It's more like ride-sharing or driving. I don't know why I call it ride-hailing. It's been a retirement hack for him because it's allowed him to supplement his income while keeping his taxable income in check through deductions, allowing him to draw on his Social Security without penalty. This is one of the first times I've heard of someone doing this with Lyft and Uber. I mean, I'm not saying it's uncommon, I'm not saying I'm surprised, but at least the first time I'm like, oh, wow, like this is kind of interesting that someone's purposely going to Lyft and Uber to drive for the sole purpose of using this as like a quote-unquote retirement hack when it comes to their Social Security. He said taking a 9-to-5 job would be about $37K a year, and he had zero benefit for him after Social Security penalties and the tax accounting for. But here's the big thing. Tax accounting gets super tricky. Again, this is why everybody's situation is different. I mean, there's a lot to this, right? So Lisa Green-Lewis, a CPA and tax expert with TurboTax. By the way, as a side note, I'm not a fan of TurboTax at all. If you use it, cool. Just hire a tax accountant, though, is my best advice. There's a whole, I don't know if I'd call it like a conspiracy or a lure, I guess. I don't know, with TurboTax, but if you use it for like a simple job, if you do have a 9-to-5 and you just happen to be watching this video, it can be useful and very easy. I'm not a big fan of it, though, for a whole other, that's a whole other thing for a whole other video. But I do some accounting videos on this channel. Maybe we'll talk about that. The strategy, though, appears to be a sound one, right? Quoted from this CPA and tax expert. Because the driver can deduct his mileage from his side gig income and make below the earnings limit, which I think is the big thing. It's kind of like this odd game of like getting close to that bar but not touching, right? His Social Security income will not be reduced. Even if a driver's income falls below the annual limit, Green-Lewis said there's one other scenario they consider. If the combination of one's income and half their claimed Social Security benefits for the year exceeds a certain threshold, as low as $25K, some of their benefits may be taxable. So again, this is where it becomes almost this odd game when it comes to taxes, you know. But that's why I suggest just hire a tax accountant even before you do your taxes. Be like, hey, I'm considering doing this. what should I know? Never a bad idea, you know, because in this situation, they may say to you, hey, based off all these different factors, you can make up to this, at least in my professional opinion. They may say, hey, I'm making this up, right? But they're like, you can make up to this, but not pass it, right? Not a bad idea just to consult, even if you're to spend, I'm making this up, like say your tax accountant. I doubt they'll do this. Like my tax accountant doesn't charge me for this, but let's say you get one that's a bit more big on the numbers. I guess maybe not the best wording when it comes to accounting, or big on like just making money. They may say, hey, you know what, give me $50 for an hour consultation, or probably $100 for an hour-long consultation. $100 is well worth it just to talk to someone for an hour to be like, all right, tell me how much I should make or not make. Tell me what you do, you know, just so you know. Many retirees are after being working side gigs, do freelance work, or receive other retirement income without knowing, and this is the big thing, how their other streams of income can impact how their Social Security income is taxed. And if you are in this position, you know, I do suggest, I will say most of I'd have to check my demographics. I haven't checked that in a while on this channel, but I think the average person watching my videos is like between, I think, 21 and 35, like that kind of range. I think mostly male as well. So I will say that elderly people is one of my smallest percentages of people watching my videos. But if you are in something like this, again, I cannot stress this enough, hire a professional, because you don't know based off your situation. If you have other streams of income coming in that you don't know about, if you have, I don't know, let's say you wrote a book years ago and you still have money coming in from that. Like things like that can add into this whole kind of unique equation. So I gotta say, you know, I mean, it works for him. Everything kind of works out in terms of the numbers, that this is a quote-unquote retirement hack for him that works very, very well. And yes, he is going out and driving and everything, but like he said, you can't really make as much money now with Lyft and Uber compared to before, especially. I've done a bajillion videos about that. And he says, look, I'm not technically doing it to make money, but to save money and all this kind of stuff when it comes to Social Security at the end of the bottom line of how much money I have to give up or potentially have to spend when it comes to taxes. Now, of course, hire a tax accountant. That's the last time I'll say it in this video. I think I've said that like 10 times or 15 times already. Just do it. But it is interesting when, you know, I do a lot of research for these videos. I do actually a lot. I study a lot of Uber and Lyft news articles. I go through them. I've read, I mean, because think about it, for each one of these videos that I film, a lot of times I might read 5 articles, pick the one that I like the best. I might go through a bunch of different things, pick the one that I like the best, and then like do a whole report on it like I'm doing in this video. One big interesting trend with Lyft and Uber is people who are retired. I don't know if I say coming out of retirement. It depends how you want to look at that. It could be like, depending on how you want to look at it from a different perspective, or tomato type situation, that start driving for Lyft and Uber, right? Like that's a big thing, that elderly drivers are becoming more and more common. And again, this is bittersweet, like I said, where on one end, some of them are like, hey, you know what, like they mentioned in the article as well, gets them out of the house, you know, and allows them to like get out of boredom. Like I remember, don't quote me on this, but I remember hearing, this is actually when I think a little bit after I graduated college, I learned that the average person who retires, the average person retires and does nothing, lives 10 years less than someone who retires and keeps doing stuff. And stuff could be a bunch of things. It could be volunteer work. It could be going out and working more if they really want to. It could be joining a local community, like the Knights of Columbus or something. It could be anything, right? Any kind of thing. And that always something that stuck with me. Now, granted, I remember someone told me that. It could have just been like a casual piece of advice, but I do think there probably is some truth to that. I will say I haven't done any research about like if there's an exact study being like, oh, you live 10 years less if you don't do anything after retirement. But I think that is a bit of a benefit with Lyft and Uber. I've talked before in other videos that one of the best things about Lyft and Uber, among a lot of them, you know, there's a lot of pros, a lot of cons, is the low barrier to entry. If you want to drive for Lyft and Uber, you don't have to go and, you know, get a whole certification. You don't have to go back to school. Of course, you do want to make sure you can drive and drive safely. That's always, of course, very important. But it's a very, very low barrier to entry. I think another thing about Lyft and Uber, which I don't think I've ever mentioned in any video, ever, is it's a very social job with, in my opinion, low social pressure. And what I mean is, when I used to bartend, you know, I mentioned that before in a bunch of other videos, it was stressful, right? I mean, you're talking about dealing with drunk people, which is a nightmare. Granted, you do have to do that driving for Lyft and Uber, ironically, but it's not that way because when someone came to the bar, they have a thing of like, okay, you make me a drink and they're trying to get your attention. you finally walk up to them and it's slam packed and they're like, hey, I'm waiting for 5 minutes for my drink. And I'm like, everyone has to wait, like, so it's very, very intense. So if you want, like, to be a bartender and, like, say you're already retired or whatever, it can be a lot of pressure. With driving, I find it's not as much, right? And if anything, I have found the nicest drivers that I've had when it comes to me taking Ubers and Lyfts have been elderly people who are retired, who are like, hey, you know what? I'm just doing this for fun. And like I said, there are a few different reasons. But on the other end, kind of a negative side effect of this, granted, this something is a bit of in the middle. He's more saying, hey, this is a great hack. Why not do it? There are a lot of people, though, given the way the economy is working, that are retired, that are saying, hey, I don't have enough money saved up. Like, it's not like I want to drive for Lyft and Uber because it's fun, social, gets me out of the house, relieves boredom. I have to. Right, and I think, again, there's a lot of different elements of this video, of course, talking about, people who are retired driving for Lyft and Uber, of course, talking about tax accounting, and then lastly, talking about things like, if you talk about Social Security and retirement hacks, so to speak, a lot of different elements, but I will say it's interesting, I think, for me, looking at something like this through a meta-analysis, seeing more and more reports of people coming out of retirement, if I call it that, and driving for Lyft and Uber. I don't know. I think, and the reason why I say I don't know is on one end, I think it's good. If, like, say you're like, hey, I'm going to drive for Lyft and Uber because I have nothing else to do. Why not? Gets you social. But on the other end, it is kind of scary because people are living longer than ever before. And this now kind of starts opening up that Pandora's box of things like Social Security becoming an issue. I know when it comes to accounting and the taxes and everything, a lot of people are saying, shoot, like, will Social Security be the way it was 50 years ago? 50 years from now, with people living longer, will we have enough money for something like that, right? All these things are coming into play, and granted, like, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to all this. And speaking of moving parts, bring this back now to Lyft and Uber, I think, at least to me, I think at the end of the day, I think this is probably, like, in my opinion, at least when it comes to Lyft and Uber, a good thing, right? I think it's a good thing that, although there's a lot of negative things about Lyft and Uber, I will say it's a very easy job, like I said before, for a lot of people who are retired, if you are considering driving for Lyft and Uber. Very low barrier to entry. You can quickly and easily sign up. It's not as stressful. Granted, yeah, you might have some difficult passengers or whatnot, but I feel like if you compare rideshare driving to a lot of other professions, way less stressful. I've done a lot of jobs, whether it's being a real estate agent, I've been an auditor for the Big Four accounting firms, I've been a bartender, like I said, I've worked on behalf of Microsoft doing sales, and I was a manager there. Like, I've done a lot of different things, and then ride sharing is one of the least stressful things. And of course, at the end of the day, the flexible schedule allows you to get out when you want, how you want. There's no quota. You can turn on the app at no warning to Uber and Lyft, turn it off at no warning to Uber and Lyft. I think, though, when I look at something like this, what really kind of pops into my head is, how is this going to translate in the next few years? With things, I think a few years ago is when I first heard about, or before the pandemic, maybe like 2018, 2019, I think it was the first time I heard about people coming out of retirement to drive for Lyft and Uber for fun. That was actually, I think, the first time I heard about it. This is about 5, even 6 years ago, which is kind of crazy to say. And then I heard about it more, and then more and more and more. And now I'm hearing about things like this, which I didn't even know was a thing that people were doing in terms of like, oh, let me use Uber and Lyft as a tool for a retirement hack. Because if you think about it, at most jobs, if, like, say, I'm making this up, you could only work to a certain amount, and then past that, you kind of like shooting yourself in the foot in a sense. Lyft and Uber is perfect for that. You drive to make that certain amount. You're like, all right, I'm done driving. I made the quota, or I kind of made the cap of what I need to make. I'm not going to drive past this because I made the amount I need to make. With another job, would you quit? Would you say, hey, sorry, I can't work anymore, stop paying me? With Uber and Lyft, it gives you that flexibility to hit the exact mark you need to in order to, like, say, supplement, or not to supplement, but in order to kind of satisfy this retirement hack you are trying to achieve. So, I don't know. I think it just, for something like this, it just makes me wonder what will be the future for driving for Uber and Lyft, especially for people who those are retired and whatnot, as the years go on, right? It's just an interesting first breadcrumb that I'm curious to see, especially with something like this involving so many different moving parts. It makes me think, okay, well, if people are trying to do all these retirement hacks as well, what's the future of Social Security looking like? Again, this is going down a whole other rabbit hole, right? But yeah, I gotta say, very interesting idea. Props to him. A lot of people talk about a lot of negative aspects about Uber and Lyft, right? I mean, I've done a bunch of videos about that. This seems to be a positive one, that what better job to take that you can flexibly and in a very controlled manner, dictate exactly how much money you want to make in a sense to satisfy and achieve this retirement hack.